My name is Milton Washington. I was adopted from South Korea, and I live in West Harlem. I had visited New York quite a bit in my early 30s, and I love the energy of this place. I love the fact that people walk around just kind of being themselves. I wanted to come to a place that I knew that I can completely just be me. Right. Oh, that's sexy. This is medicine for me. Korean food is medicine. I picked Koreatown because it's the other half of me. I'm feeling some kind of way. I come down to K-Town, grab me some of my food that reminds me of my childhood, then I feel better. You look at me and I'm a black dude, you know what I mean? As I'm walking around in the streets, most people say, yeah, it's black dude. But, I picked Koreatown because there's a certain amount of nostalgia that I feel when I come to Koreatown. I'm very much in tune to that side of me. The tastes and the smells, take me back to a time and place that rejuvenates me. And I love sitting down at a restaurant and eating some of the, panchan, and it's like, I'm like, wow, I haven't had that since I was 5. At the end of the day, it just makes me feel good. It also kind of reinforces that connection to Korea, a side of me that I always love and cherish. The definition of Amerasian, it's a simple term. Any child that was born in Asia with Asian descent, usually the mother, and that is also mixed, from the blood of an American soldier. I'm an Amerasian because my father was probably, a black serviceman. But I was born on Korean soil, so first 10 years of my life was in South Korea, but never a Korean citizen. If you're born as an Amerasian in South Korea, you don't get a birth certificate, period, because you're not Korean. I was 8 when I was adopted from Korea. I had only been in the orphanage for about 10 days, and prior to that point, it was me and my mother. And we moved from Tongnacheon to a town called Pupyeong. We lived in a single kind of studio apartment, and behind us was the alley where all the American soldiers used to come to play, right? And when I say come to play, that's where they used to come to get the girls, basically. But after a couple of months of coming to Pupyeong, I remember seeing my mother getting arrested. What I didn't know was the reason that she got rounded up by the Korean police was my mother was a boss, she was a mama-san, she ran the girls. She probably got wind of when these sting operations were happening and she had to go to serve her time. But meanwhile, she would park me at an orphanage. When my mother dropped me off at St. Vincent's Orphanage for Amerasians, the first kid that I basically saw was this tall kid named Joseph. And he was riding this big bicycle. And I love bicycles, even to this day. I love anything that goes fast, on some wheels. So next day I got on that bike and pretty much never got off. 10 days later, this big black Ford LTD pulls up, and out of that car, this black man comes up. He's got the military hat on, and I was just like, wow, he's black enough to be my daddy, I'm thinking. And then the passenger side, this woman pops out. She's got this afro, this flowing dress, and this brown skin. She was gorgeous. I was 8 years old, but I knew she was fine. I knew that. I ran over to that black Ford LTD, and I locked all the doors. I want them to be my parents. Anyone who asks my mother, why did you decide to adopt Milton? She'll tell you, we didn't adopt Milton. Milton adopted us. You might never hear someone say this, but considering my situation being international adoptee, I think it was almost an advantage for me being black because I was always black. When I was in Korea, yeah, I caught hell from all of the Korean little boys that, that I wanted to play with out in the village that didn't want to let me play because I was black. I don't remember a whole lot of English, but I remember that song. Basically the monkey's butt is red and stay away from us. But, that kind of isolation that I experienced once I got adopted by a black family, it's like It's like I found a family. I didn't know what it meant to be black in America, so that was learned. Fortunate for me, I was athletic. I had a bit of a mouthpiece on me, I could talk. So making friends wasn't too big of an issue. So I was always in pursuit of that identity of what it meant to be black. I have enough memories to write a book about it. I'm just about done with my book. It's a memoir called Slicky Boy. Slicky Boy is basically a word that was thrown around Koreatown that has a U.S. military base. Mixed race little kids like me, little Amerasian kids like me, that's running around on the streets to all times of the hour that will steal anything that you have. And I call my book Slicky Boy because that's, number one, that's kind of what I was, because I kind of stole my way into the Washington family. Really, at the end of the day, though, it's a book about, the love of two mothers. My first mother, my Korean mother, and how, I remember how she loved me and how that love kind of insulated, my circumstances, insulated me, within the circumstances of being a black kid in South Korea. And then also having the fortune of being adopted and having a mother that says, even to this day, she says, Milton, when I think of son, I think of you first before all of my other kids. That love of two mothers is something that's, that has helped me, within, my story of adoption, which I know is, in a lot of ways, very different. I think, a good time to expect when the book is going to drop is probably in May, maybe even Mother's Day of in 2014, because of what the book is about. I think I would have to jump to one of the kind of the main messages to my book. Have compassion on yourself and those around you that created that situation. And that goes a long ways into you discovering who and what you are.
My name is Julie Young, and we are in Stuyvesant Heights. It was sort of like suburban girl, left as fast as I could to go to the city and fell in love with the city. Was able to find myself, to like myself, to love myself, and fall in love and have a family and end up in a backyard in Stuyvesant Heights, Brooklyn. No, we don't usually eat like this, only on the weekends. I'm somewhat of a health nut, generally. I went to school in the Bronx at Fordham. Right afterwards, I moved to Brooklyn to go to law school. And then I lived in the same apartment building after college on the outskirts of Park Slope, and then literally moved basically across the street into Fort Greene. We lived there for the past few years, and then we just moved here. I'm a Brooklyn girl.
Oh, look at those plates, they're looking good.
This is my daughter, Jade. Jade Ji-Yun. She has my Korean name for her middle name. She has a twin brother, Jasiri. She's the black version of me. And he's the Asian version of Jamal.
See you later.
It actually took me 6 years to have my kids. A lot of heartache, a lot of difficulty. And so there's just sort of a lot of extra emotion that goes with it. And as an adoptee, it was really important to me to have biological children, which is part of why I went through everything I went through to have them. But they know that I was born in Korea. What do you guys know about me being adopted?
Me forget what I told you now. Me forget. You always say me forget.
You like Korean food?
Not everyone.
Jade is more adventurous than Jasiri with her eating. So she likes some of it, but you like some of it. Right?
I don't even like kimchi.
No, Jasiri does not like kimchi.
It's so spicy.
So I grew up in a town called Fairport, which is a suburb of Rochester, New York. And I came here from Korea when I was 3. So my Korean mother just told me a year ago in March that I was born literally on the street in Seoul. She was en route to the hospital, and she waited too long, and I didn't wait. So this is my Korean mom and dad, right before, I think they were newly engaged, and I think my mom said she was about 24 in this picture. This picture though, my mom showed me in 2004 when I went to go meet her, and I was coveting it, and I asked her to please make me a copy, and she just sent the original. I love this photo. I found them, and we had correspondence sometime around 1993, but then I did not actually meet them until 2004. I went back for the Korean adoptee gathering, and my husband went with me, and I met them then. And actually my American mom went as well. She met them too. My family actually brought me to the airport when I was going to be adopted. So this is, as we're leaving the house, this is me and my mom to go to the airport. And this is me and my brother at the airport, right before I got on the plane.
So you went on the plane by yourself?
I did. And
when you were a kid?
Yeah, when I was 3.
Oh, that was scary, right?
It was scary. This is one thing, adoptees should not just believe the story they're told. I was told that I was abandoned, and so I thought that my whole life growing up I was like on a stoop or something and someone found me. Turns out that my mom did want to give me up and was in touch with KSS who processed the whole adoption. But while they were waiting for it to happen, I still lived with my family. And it was essentially because my dad was not a stable person, and I was the youngest child, and all of the other children actually went to school or were working. My sister was only 11 when I left, but she was already working. And so my mom also had to go to work, and she couldn't leave me alone with him. So I wasn't really abandoned the way that I thought I was abandoned. With my actual mother, it's hard because, you know, there is no pre-existing relationship essentially. So it's kind of like you start this very deep, meaningful relationship right away. Initially, when we would have long breaks in correspondence or something like that, I would be a little bit freaked out, but I was much younger then. I was in my 20s, and I think now that because I've had the times I have had with my Korean mom, that's been it's brought a lot of satisfaction to me psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, you know. I mean, when my mom was here a year ago in March, she said the words that I sort of feel like we all want to hear. I said, you know, did you regret giving me up? And she said, from the moment I put you on that plane. And that was all it was like, hearing that was so cleansing. I don't know, it was very healing to hear that. Up until my mom's visit last year, I don't think I really forgave her. And after that visit, I saw that, you know, being an adoptee, you're so focused on yourself. And I was so focused on my hurt and my anger and my emotions. But having my mom in my own home for almost a month really, really, really allowed me to see that she suffered so much and continues to. I mean, to this day, you know. I actually wrote her a poem after she left, and I basically was saying that I forgive you, and I begged her to forgive herself. As I was growing up, because my mother used to do Korean adoptions with Love the Children, I used to speak on panels. I mean, I was always very involved in sort of the adoption information world. Now, I am on the board of Korean American Story, but that's actually one of the reasons why I love it so much is that, you know, as adoptees, sometimes we can feel not Korean, and if we go to sort of traditional Korean organizations, there's a little bit of pushback both from us internally but also from the group because we don't speak Korean, we're not traditionally Korean, we don't, you know, necessarily fit into all of the traditions. And I know I personally felt like that a lot of times when I would go to Korean organizations. I wrote a column for them, which they really liked a lot, and that was actually about when my kids were turning 3. I had all of these emotions because it was the same age I was when I was put on the plane to come over here. So they really liked that piece, and from that I started writing a monthly column called Heart and Soul. It's the first Korean American organization that I felt truly embraced by. It's a very progressive organization that includes mixed race Korean Americans, gay and lesbian Korean Americans, Korean adoptees, like we are all included with Korean American Story. And the purpose of it is to share all of our stories through different creative means to create a history. So it's pretty powerful. Honestly, I would like to live internationally, but now with a family, I think that would be hard. But other than that, there's nowhere else I could live in New York City. I've literally been in New York longer than anywhere else in my lifetime. So longer than Korea, longer than Fairport. I am a true New Yorker.
My name is Alexander Nicholas Pillis. I'm the executive chef of Italy, New York, and Chicago. Italy is located in the Flatiron District in Manhattan, across from Madison Square Park. We're sitting in La Scuola Grande in Italy, New York. This is our larger cooking school. We have 2 here. One of the first things I cooked was a disaster. It was actually spaghetti, and I did not stir the pasta, so it was one giant bundle of undercooked noodles, which I had to secretly dump into the garbage without my parents knowing it, and then pop in another box. Dinner was a little bit late that night. I do a giant loop of every location. I am the executive chef of Italy. There are 7 eating locations here. I oversee all of that, including menu creation. So the fish that we have in our retail fish market is the same fish that we're serving in our restaurants. Is that the special for today?
Yes.
It's a great place to learn about Italian food and culture. Well, I started cooking when I was about 13. I started cooking dinner for my family. And then in college, I was working part-time just to make some extra cash. I realized that cooking was what I enjoyed more than actually what I was studying, which was pre-med. And I had 1 semester left of college, and I just basically left. And so then I started applying for jobs in New York City, and that was 13 years ago, and I've been with Mario Batali, the B&B Hospitality Group, for the last 13 years, and here at Italy for 3. I have a fond memory of being in the kitchen in the sense that I saw what my father was doing, I saw what my mother was doing. My earliest memories are of me in the kitchen watching my dad cook. My dad was a classically trained Chinese noodle maker, so he made noodles by hand and just through geometric progressions, cooked the noodles. My mom was the front of house manager, cashier. I understood what they did on a daily basis and what it took to raise 4 kids in Seoul at that time. The last meal I had in Korea before we went to the airport, my uncles brought over 2 boiled chickens and a couple heads of lettuce, and so we were eating chicken wraps with kimchi, and that was my last memory before heading to the airport. When I was adopted and I came to the United States, I showed up with my little brother. My little brother was 2.5, and the cause of our adoption was we were both suffering from malnutrition. This was primarily because my father died when I was 6, and we lost the business and we lost the apartment, so we moved to a church-run orphanage. And my mom worked in the city and she tried the best she could, but it was at that point where she couldn't just make enough money, and as opposed to seeing us die, she made the choice to give us up for adoption. My adoption was an unusual adoption. I don't know if it's common, but we were allowed contact with my birth family. My mother would write us letters, and then my adopted parents would write letters for us. I mean, in the sense of giving my mother an update and sending photos of us. My mother never knew where we lived, except for the fact that we lived in New Jersey, and the contact lasted for, I would say, up until high school, and then at which point I became a teenager, basically became Americanized, if you will. When I was younger, my parents tried to introduce me to other Koreans, and It was really difficult to basically feel a part of the Korean community. I was the Twinkie, the banana, and my adopted parents tried to get me involved with other Koreans, with other Korean, by taking us to Korean churches and dinners, but by that point they just didn't understand, like, who are these two kids with the white parents sitting at that table over there. Even in college, trying to hang out with the KSA. I mean, some of them were cool and some were not. They just felt that I wasn't Korean enough. I think you got to be comfortable with yourself, and I'm comfortable with myself. I mean, when I go to eat in Korean restaurants, I have no idea what's on the menu, so I normally order the same thing. But I have Korean friends now, and when we do go to new places, they order everything, and it's a new experience. So you could either feel rejected or you could move on, and I moved on. Even though I wasn't raised in a Korean household, I never not think that I'm not Korean. I am Korean, but I was just adopted by Americans, but to this day, I still say that I'm a Korean. I have a cousin who's basically living in Philadelphia. She was adopted about 6 months after we were adopted, and her family went to Asia for her graduation, and they went to her adoption agency, and just so happens that her mother and my mother are cousins, and when she met her birth mother and my mother told her to look out for us. We were living in New Jersey at that time, and just through searching through the email, she found us. We had this strange email of, "Hi, I'm your cousin, I'm living in California, would you like to meet?" My brother and I were both confused because we don't know about any cousins in Korea. I mean, I remember my family in Korea. My family in Korea was very large, but we didn't know that our cousin was also adopted, where she was in the same situation as we were. So it was very, meeting her and then talking to her, and then we discovered we had similar stories. Once you make that kind of connection and then you reconnect with someone that you haven't talked to in a long time, you also go through that period of what do you say to your mother and your brothers who you haven't spoken to in 25 years. It was a combination of shock, awe, and at the same time, it was comforting knowing that we had family again. I have not been back to Korea since my adoption. However, I am planning with my brother next year to go back to Korea to see my family. I am looking forward to the food, and I am assuming it's going to be just like any other family gathering. There's going to be way too much food, and but I'm sure it's going to be an amazing meal.
My name is James Lane, and right now we're in Central Park around 103rd Street around the west side. I grew up in this area, and I don't know officially what they call it. They call different parts of the park certain things, and I just always called it like my part of the park. I would say that I know a lot of the secret areas of the park, and it's funny, as time goes on and I haven't returned to the park, I sort of forget them. So now I'm taking my son Xavier around through the park with me, and I'm like, I don't remember that there. Let me take you over to where the water starts. My wife, she was always wondering, like, how does a kid in Harlem, like, how do you grow up without like parks and forests and stuff like that? And I just explained to her, my whole childhood was going from Central Park in the daytime, running around, climbing rocks, playing Frisbee, and then go over to Riverside Park to watch the sunsets. And that was like the thing that kept me whole, I guess, during rough times in the 70s when crime was up, family members dying because of violence and drug use and alcohol abuse. And so the park always was like my sacred place that I would come to and spend a lot of hours here. Currently, I live in Park Slope, Brooklyn with my wife and Xavi. I've been there for, I guess it's about 15 years now. I never imagined being in Brooklyn. I always considered myself a Manhattan boy. I loved the fact that I could walk to any place I wanted to go to. Currently, I have a very demanding day job with a technology company, internet technology company. Then my spare time, I'm in a heavy metal band. And then in my other spare time, I'm helping. I do Tai Chi and help to raise Xavi. And then in the little bit of time that I have left, I'm trying to run for public office. I'm running for a public advocate for New York City on the Green Party line. One of the strongest issues for me this year, which actually came from years of, pain, I lost both of my parents when I was 23, and during the process of taking care of all the financial information, we opened up a safe deposit box and they found adoption papers for a male gamble. And I asked the clerk, what is a male gamble? And so the guy looks at me and he's like, well, do your parents have any of the boys? I'm like, no, of course not. He's like, well, then that's you. And so my world just was shattered. I couldn't understand, wait a minute, I'm these people's son. I don't understand this. So I ran home. I called my sister who lives in Colorado. She's 10 years older. I said, was I adopted? And I said, I found adoption papers for a male gamble. And she's like, oh, I always knew your name was Victor. I guess she was very concerned that I just learned this now. So she had called my grandmother up, and my grandmother called me a few minutes after I got off the phone with her trying to figure out what's going on. And my grandmother explained to me that my adoptive parents tried to have another child, but it was a long, painful process for them. It was they had 9 miscarriages, and so they turned to adoption as a solution for what they wanted to do. My wife, luckily, works in the social work area, and she knew the adoption agency that I was adopted out of. And so when my wife and I first met with the agency to get my non-identifying information, the story was that my mother was raped at the age of 15 and became pregnant. It was really tough hearing that, because I know somebody very close to me that was a victim of rape too. So it was just like this knife through the heart again. Through the non-identifying information that we're receiving and hearing about my mother feeling that nobody in this world loved her, and that just added even more pain to it. And so when I asked the social worker, can I get any kind of information? Because they were asking me, is there any information that you need? I'm like, well, what information can I ask you that will help me find this woman, my mother, to let her know that I'm alive, that I'm all right? It's like, well, there's really nothing that we can give you. Then I'm like, well, I guess I have nothing to ask you, because you can't ask me, you can't tell me the story that makes my whole reason for being here even more painful, that my mother couldn't keep me for very tragic reasons and not give me a way to get back to her. So with my situation, I was in this adoption support group that I met one of the members at this event, and it was definitely a big changing moment for me. And I just felt like, wow, this is like a whole new family for me. It helped me realize a lot of pains that I had when I was growing up, and how I sort of dealt with them by sort of sealing them away, which I guess is the story of my life of being adopted at the age of 2. There's a lot of memories that I don't have. About 2 years into the group, I finally turned to the support leader, and she referred me to her paid searchers, private investigators, and they're a really great agency. They said that they could find anyone within 30 days, and so when I gave them my information, 30 days went by, 60 days went by, 90 days went by, and other search engines I'd worked with, they said, yeah, your information is really atrocious. You have to really go back and get more data for us to do a really good search. So at the beginning of this year, I got a call and an email saying that your case is almost solved. Next day they called me, asked me a few questions, and they said, yeah, that sounds like it could be possible it's her. And they gave me this data. It was like 12 pages of information that they've got, and all these leads about my half-sisters and aunts, and it was pretty amazing. So I had all this information. I felt like my head was going to explode. And so the first thing I did was I had a card with a picture of Xavier on it. And I wrote a little note on the back. And so I took this card to one of the people that were listed as one of my aunts. It's like, oh, you know, you're Nancy's child. And so she gave my information over to who we call our Aunt Mamie, who's actually my grandmother's sister. And she passed that information over to one of my half-sisters, and I met her. And it was a really great time. And the first thing I remember saying was, oh my God, it's you, my brother, Victor. And I looked, it's like, you know my name was Victor? She's like, yeah, I always knew your name was Victor. And I think about the time when my sister on my adopted side said, I always knew your name was Victor. So it was like a kind of sad time and now a happy time. First thing she did, my sister did, was during our meeting, she put me on the phone with my mother, which is, I was like, no, I can't. I was like, I don't even know like how to even go through this. And so the first thing my mother says, oh, I hope you don't hate me for giving you up for adoption. I was like, no, of course not. I've been looking for you to thank you and to let you know that I'm okay and to let you know that I love you. Because my son always looks at me because he knows when I get like stressed out about talking about certain issues because they're really important and they're really personal to me, and all these emotions come up again. A lot of people say you really should be angry that you weren't allowed access to this information for so many years, but I feel mad about a lot of other things, more political nature. I'm frustrated with the fact that people get adopted into this system every day. We had a big rally in Brooklyn recently against this assembly member that's blocking a bill to allow adoptees rights to their birth certificates. That makes me mad because there's really just no justification for that. And as long as that kind of injustice exists, I can never really fully enjoy being in reunion right now. And this is why I decided to run for public office. I never thought I would be here today. There was many days I didn't think I would be here. So I'm just glad I'm here. I'm glad I have a wife that loves me, a lovely 8-year-old son. Gandhi has a great quote: at first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. And that's something that I've sort of been living by ever since I heard that quote. My name is James Lane.
AKA Victor Gamble.
I'm Nicole Chi, and I was adopted from Korea. Came to America when I was 6 months old. I grew up in Kingston, New York, which is upstate. And I chose this area because I've been coming down here since before I can remember. My parents and my family would just come down to New York, I guess, on a weekend and basically end up in Chinatown for dinner with the rest of our family and just hang out. My dad is Chinese and my mom is Caucasian, and I feel comfortable here, I guess, just because I grew up. It's part of my environment. So one of their first places when they had first met and started dating was a restaurant like right around the corner. So that restaurant is probably my favorite restaurant, and we've been going there as a family for, I guess they're over 30 years since I'm 30 now. So I'm just as comfortable in Chinatown. You know, my heritage is being Korean American, but I identify being more Chinese. That's just what I grew up with, and I've never really felt like, I guess I was adopted. I don't want to say my Korean name because I'm not sure if it's correct, but my Korean name in my birth file, I believe, is Hee Ryung, but I'm not positive. I haven't double checked that with my parents in a while. So but I believe that that is what's in there. I have 4 older brothers, so I'm the youngest and the only girl. I was always like the little, I guess like the princess. Growing up, I guess, in Kingston is pretty small. It's not small, but it's not, you know, it's not New York. Surprisingly, there were a couple people in my town that were adopted, and I know one of the families, the mother would actually introduce her daughter as, oh, this is my adopted daughter. And to me, that was kind of sad, but at the same time, I don't know how big adoption was, you know, when I was growing up. So for her, I guess people might have just assumed that just because she has, you know, Caucasian parents and she's Asian. So it's kind of like, oh, well, where did they come from? So for me, being adopted into an Asian family, I guess I never really had that issue of feeling different than others and being surrounded by a family that's different than me. But, you know, when I was growing up, or even now, it's somebody who's not Asian, or it depends on how somebody asks you, they're like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, I'm from New York. And then they kind of look at you like, no, but where are you really from? You know, I used to get probably a little bit angrier when I was younger, and I would be like, I'm from New York. Like, what do you want to know? And I know they're searching, you know, they're searching for China, Korea, Japan, you know, whatever your background is. And just because I know they're searching for it, I don't want to tell them. For somebody else as an outsider to look on it at you and just be like, oh, you're this, and it's kind of like they're pointing at you and almost ostracizing you in a way to make you different, and it's kind of just like, what are you talking about? You're completely ignorant. I'm pretty open to people about my adoption because it gets kind of confusing to them when I went to school. You know, my last name being Chinese and me being Asian, unless you're really good with names and maybe like Asian features, you might know. So when I go, hey, I'm Nicole Chi, somebody's just like, oh, you're Chinese. And I'm like, no, I'm Korean. And then they're like, oh, so your mom's Korean because your last name's Chinese. And I'm like, no. And it's almost kind of funny because then I watch their confused face. And then I'm just like, I was adopted. I haven't really been involved in anything of Korean culture or adoptee related to being adopted. This is really the first thing that I've done related to my adoption. I guess I just never felt like I needed to. I always felt pretty content in my life with my family. So I guess I was never really searching for any closure with my adoption. You know, my parents never hid or tried to sway me away from my Korean heritage. My parents had both always said, you know, if you want to go to Korea, if you want to find your birth parents, you know, you're welcome. You know, we'll help you every step of the way. But I feel that I'm lucky enough to have the parents that I have. So I just think that my parents are my parents. My parents and my family have never made me feel like I was adopted. It was like, you know, immediately you're part of the family, you know. It was like, we've been waiting for you, you know. It's like that 6 months that I might have been in Korea was like the 9 months I would have been in the womb of my mother. At the same time, I do wonder even beforehand, you know, why I guess my biological parents would have given me up for adoption. I would open the door, you know, if she ever wanted to find me, but I don't know if I would necessarily go and search for her, but the door is always open. Yeah.
The average kid attends school 180 days each year. Multiply that by 12 years and you get a grand total of 2,160 compulsory school days. Today is day 2,155 and my name is Chad Goler. And I'm your anything but average black kid. And for as long as I can remember, I lived with my white parents in the virtually all-white suburb of Tacoma, Washington. My name is Chad Goler, sojourner, and I'm a Seattle-based writer and solo performer. I'm also a transracial adoptee, and a lot of my work deals with identity development and what it was like growing up as a dark-skinned black guy with two white parents. For me, I started just writing my stories, and for me, it makes sense. So I always say that the stage is the one, everything fits and matters about me on the stage. It all makes sense. None of that other stuff makes sense to a lot of people, but when I'm telling my story, it always makes sense to me. I looked at identity, what happens to us as transracial adoptees once we move on. And the term is honoring white and suburban privilege. And it's kind of the belief that, if you have white parents and you're living in a white area, a lot of their benefits and privileges are bestowed into you. Adopted children take just like birth children in many ways. So I access to certain schools and friends and identity, and that's the way I was raised. So my new show, Writing Cards with Black People and Other Newly Dangerous Acts, a memoir of vanishing whiteness, long title, started as my story about aging out. Of what happens. I created this thing called honorary white and suburban privilege. I came up with this term about 4 years ago and was developing it. And I began to work, and it's a love song because, it's one thing, just as kids age out of foster care, transracial kids age out. We get up, we move on, we go to college, we leave our home. And we're not tied to this. So it looks like, for me, and everybody else, like tons of the people see it, and you get that connection. And of course, the difference is often we age out, we have no idea. What I remember most about that first stop was how he asked, "Where are you headed?" Not license, registration, and proof of insurance, please, but where are you headed? Western, I reply. "Oh, you headed up there to play ball?" "Why, yes, sir," I reply. "I'm not really headed up there to play ball. In fact, I've never played ball. I'm just big and black. And when you're big and black, well, everybody thinks you play ball." And so, rather than disappoint total strangers while fielding questions such as, "Well, why the hell not? You're sure as hell built for it," I just say yes and pray they don't ask what position. I'm a big black guy in a country that's afraid of big black guys, and I don't often get to open my mouth and say, "Oh, no, wait, I'm a big black guy with white parents from Montana," which I have. I mean, it's in the play, but that's not always happening. People try to separate that from being black or being fat. All these things make up who I am. Now, I, on some level, knew the toughest part was the racial part, which was the adoption. That took years. It took years of therapy. I had to learn. I'm doing a piece tonight where I'm talking about this whole becoming black, this going from whiteness into blackness. Spending years in therapy because I wanted to be a white woman, and we used to go with my hand behind my hair because I had long blonde hair. It's cute and nice on the stage, but it was very tragic going through it. But really, I just wanted a mirror. I wanted somebody who looked like me, and there was nobody. All those prejudices that white folks have about minority people, you get them too. And so I grew up. And it wasn't in my household, but I grew up, hearing things. I mean, I don't know how many times I would hear white people talk about the difference between niggers and blacks, and then they reassured me I wasn't the latter. Well, after a while, after 5, 10, 15, 18 years, you buy into that. So I had fears of black people. I used to cross the street and I saw multiple black people coming my way. I had to make a conscious decision to step out of whiteness and descend into blackness. I hate driving, especially freeway driving. Unfortunately, there are 125 miles and 5 counties of freeways separating University Place from Western Washington University to the north. Only here, unlike in slave times, heading north, not so good. In fact, here, the further north I go, the more of these questionable stops I seem to encounter. Only instead of Harriet Tubman guiding my chariot up the interstate, it's just me, Amy Grant, Dashboard Jesus, and a big gulp. I know, I thought the same thing. In what world wouldn't the Holy Trinity of Amy Grant, dashboard Jesus, and a big gulp guarantee safe passage. Turns out that would be my world. A world where, for the first time, I find myself being pulled over repeatedly.
So I began a very intentional journey out of whiteness into blackness. We began with a name change, followed by a move to New York City, which was the interesting thing, which was the first time I ever saw my reflection and was pleased. You know, prior to that, I'd always turned away. I mean, physically, I saw it in other people. And so that was really a coming of age, that whole experience.
But I'm not a young black man. I mean, I am, but I'm also a suburban kid with white parents from Montana. Look, I even have the family pictures to prove it. Pictures I would soon begin tucking directly behind my driver's license. Where the license went, the picture followed, sometimes whispering, sometimes shouting, I am not the black man you think I am. Now please, let me pass without further delay or hindrance.
What I want to talk about is that there's some fundamental differences. There's this fear of black men based on a whole different thing. And we need to talk about that first and then move on to things like police accountability and all that other kind of stuff. And we also, white people, have to have a conversation based on the fact that when it was come to Jesus, it's like the fact that this is not happening to me. This is one of the most important things. The fact that, as I say in this piece, the fact that it's not something that didn't happen to you and your fraternity brothers doesn't mean it's not happening to other brothers. Because that's the big deal. That's the big deal. Is people they drive by well, I didn't get pulled over. You must have.
I have two lenses, so you cannot deny my whiteness. I mean, I'm as white as any white person in this room. Everything from raised in Lawrence Welk and Amy Grant, all that. My white card is intact. And so when I tell you things that happened to me as a white child, and then I tell you things as black, you can't just dismiss them. So I have a voice, and we have a voice because I've been at the table. So I know what it's like to drive around in a car in a white neighborhood and have nothing happen. And I know what's happened to take that same car and drive to college and have a gun in my face. It's really a story that white people should be telling. It's a story that transracial parents should tell. I'll say shame on all transracial parents who have this story who don't tell them. My mom tells this story, these stories of what happened to their black children, and then how that changed when they knew they were with a white lady. Because they'll believe it for you all much quicker than me, and they'll believe it for me much quicker than from Tyrone down the block.
Somebody told me years ago, you can't love the tree if you hate the roots. And our roots, in my case, are black or Korean. These are our roots. These are our people at the core. These are our clay. We might have been raised in somebody else's pot. But at the end of the day, we are black or Asian or whatever. And so if I'm looking around and I'm not connecting or I'm not finding black people attractive or whatever, I'm not finding myself attractive either. You can't love yourself and hate the roots.
Mine on the side of the interstate, with license, family picture, registration, and proof of insurance in hand, I crack my front door instead of back window, and with that come face to face with the barrel of an officer's gun as he barks, "Don't move! Stay in the car!" And again, I'm ill prepared. Not for the don't move part, I get that, though I must say not moving is a whole lot more difficult when you're staring down the barrel of a gun. Still, what I'm ill prepared for is something much bigger. Is the role of young black man. For it is not a role I auditioned for, nor one I particularly want. I did not survive those 2,160 compulsory school days to die at the side of the interstate. So with that, I apologize for startling the officer. Promise to get my lights checked. I return to the interstate. Hands at 10 and 2, and braced. Braced for future impacts. Thank you very much.
Yellow dress. I am 7 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Rachel, wake up! What? What? I didn't steal the peanuts. I'm going back to sleep. No, we're here. We're in America. You've been saying that every hour for the last 15 hours.
My name is Marissa Litchwick, and I was a part of the conference along with the performance panel of the conference. I have a solo show called Yellow Dress, which is my coming of age adoption story solo show.
I grew up in a family of 10, and my parents adopted 8 kids, 5 Korean, 3 Caucasian. They have 2 of their own. And I came when I was 7, my brother was 10 who came with me. So adoption was just the elephant in the room. I was adopted. I knew it, I had memories of it. And I think I found acting pretty much right away, definitely when I was probably about 10, 12. And because I came from a family of 10, I used it to hide behind. And at first it was, a hiding mechanism, and then it grew and it became this love, and then it became my life's work. July 21st, 1985, I land John F. Kennedy International Airport. I land to a sea of identical faces. Wow. They all look alike. No, they don't, stupid. Yes, they do. How do we find her? Oh, I see her. She's back there. Don't point, stupid. But she's back there.
So Yellow Dress is a bit of an epic story because it covers an entire journey and back. It's an autobiographical story. It covers from my time when I was on the streets of Korea to the orphanage to when I got adopted in this, bicultural family of 10 to when I go back to Korea to find my birth family, and then sort of what happens, how I'm able to sum all of this up by the end of the story.
Well, hello. My name is Gail, and I'm going to be your new mother. And your new name is Marissa. Can you say Marissa? Marissa.
What inspired me to go into solo work was when I was I think I was 15, I saw John Leguizamo's Freak, and he just blew me away. He took on over 40 characters in that show, expertly, and he blew me away. And since then I was I want to do that, but I knew I couldn't do what he did, so I was how do I tell it in the form of this Korean, experience.
2 hours later, my father, we drive through the crazy concrete jungle that is New York City and arrive at a clown's house. McDonald's. And inside I see a long counter. African girls? What? Did we come to Africa? No, I could have swore I came to America. Oh ma, did we come to Africa? We're gonna get some food. American food? No. I don't want to go by the counter. I'm so afraid we came to America. Hello, my name is Tanisha. Welcome to McDonald's. How can I help you?
So Christmas 2006, I get 2 emails. One email is this job offer to teach and perform in Korea, and then the second was a letter from my birth dad.
I realized that there was an intersection after I went through the reunification process, meeting all of my birth family members, and I realized I had to do something about it. I had this profound experience, this incredible story, and that's when I knew that I had to create a piece. And I'm not really a writer. I don't think that's where my true talent lies, but I knew that I could become these people and tell the story from their point of view, from my point of view. And then I realized that's sort of been what I was meant to do, at least with my experience and with the talent that I was given. There was something that was missing throughout my entire time in Korea, which was my father kept everything a secret still while he was going through this reunification process with me. Even though he had told his brothers and sisters and they met me, he did not tell my half-sister or my stepmother. So a part of me wanted to meet my half-sister because she was sort of the golden child that got to stay in Korea. And so the story really, I think that is really where the drama of that story is. It really is just an epic story. It starts off with, a young girl, an orphan, and then sort of her journey, her like magical journey to this orphanage where she's given this yellow dress, which is where she sees herself for the very first time because she has no idea that she has a birthday or that she has an identity or an image. And then through there, she gets a letter from this family overseas and then goes to America. And then in America, she realizes nothing is like the way you make America seem when you're an orphan in South Korea. My mom runs down, scoops me up, brings me back into the house. Oh, Mom, where are we going? I gotta go bathroom. We go here. Bathroom. Whoa, they have their own pool for one person. Oh, but I still gotta go, and I just see a pool, and I see a sink, and well, I go in the sink, pull down my pants, I'm ready to go. No, you go here. Inside the pool? Really? Okay. Oh, America. Yeah, I could get used to this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kate, and I am the president of AdoptSource. I'm standing outside the Parkway Theater in South Minneapolis. The film festival was first incepted in 2009 by AdoptSource. And in 2012, we partnered with Watch Adoptee Films, Land of Gazillion Adoptees, and AK Connection. The goal of the Transracial Film Festival is just to really highlight and showcase adoptee stories and perspectives through film.
Welcome to the 2013 Minnesota Transracial Film Festival. Big applause, please.
I had been doing oral histories with 3 generations of Koreans living in the United States beginning in the late 90s. Partly because, as most people are aware, Korean War is not spoken about. It's either unknown or forgotten, and the people that we know least about are Koreans living here who were survivors of that experience. And so I began to do those oral histories partly to learn myself what it was to have lived through that experience, and also why it's been so difficult for people to speak about it.
Through this film, I feel like I delved deeper into the history of not only Korean history and the war, but also Korean American community and the Korean community that lives, among us, that we're a part of.
I really resonated of all the films, and I haven't seen Angela's film yet, Closure, and I'm looking forward to it. But the film I really resonated with was yours, and it's not because you're sitting next to me that I'm telling you this. It's that when I was watching it, I kept thinking, wow, we have a really similar attitude about how you turn oppression or pain into opportunity.
I'm a domestic adoptee. I was adopted from Tennessee, and so watching the films has definitely, there's been many differences in terms of, I know my birth language, and I didn't have to travel as far. However, there are similarities in the sense that growing up in the Pacific Northwest, there are such great differences in terms of language and culture, and I felt like there was a loss, and so traveling to Tennessee, I still am not able to fully communicate even though we all speak English. And so I was noticing those similarities in terms of travel and distance.
When I look at South Korea is so wealthy. They are free to move around. In North Korea, outside of Pyongyang, the people are very poor and they have very little resources. So my wife and I have a foundation and we support the orphanages in North Korea. And medical equipment and food for the orphanages. If you go to visit one, they all have clinics. There's a sign that says clinic, and it's an empty room with paint falling off, and there's nothing in the clinic. So my wife came up with an idea of clinic cases, and they're really roll-on suitcases filled with medical supplies. So that's why I go to North Korea. They have very little resources. They're a poor country. South Korea is super wealthy.
Thank you.
When I grew up, adoption was pretty clouded in secrecy and not talking about it at all. You pretended, and I wish I could show you pictures of when I was a child. I looked so much more Korean. And I was told I was American, and I would look in the mirror and I would see this Korean face, and it was such a disconnect that it really threw me for a loop for years. And to see it come to this point where people are talking about being honest and open about what goes on in an adoption and in every adoption story seems to me like such a leap. I'm still grasping it.
That's really great perspective for me to hear. It's interesting because I feel like we have so much further to go, you know?
We really have come a long way.
And further to go. Definitely.
So advocacy, we are up first, and we are very excited to be here.
What supports do adoptive parents need in terms of education before they adopt? And then what are we doing once those children are placed in the home? I'm hoping that that is going to help with the discourse that's already out there right now about what's going on, and provide actually some evidence about it, which is, I think, important in advocacy work, is to have some kind of evidence and some witnessing. I see research as being about witnessing people's lives.
With China and any institution, any body, any organization, you can't control what they do. You can't control the policies they decide to institute and implement, but we can prepare ourselves.
Performance, broadly speaking, is way more than just the traditional idea of performance. That the storytelling is more than you and your own personal stories, as well as whatever of your dancing and so forth.
There was some great nexus of many different factors that have come together, I think, in Minnesota, in this community. A number of us adoptees coming of age at the same time, wanting so badly to tell that story and recognizing the power of telling that story.
The stage is the one, everything fits and matters about me on the stage. It all makes sense. None of that other stuff makes sense to a lot of people, but when I'm telling my story, it always makes sense to me.
Telling our own stories is an intervention. It's an interruption to a dominant narrative, right? And there's something about being able to claim that, to retell, to be able to tell your own story as an adult, and then exploring all those different intersections that happen as we age too. I mean, we are not kids anymore.
But you don't need to get on stage to tell your story. You get on the internet, write a blog, send it to your friends for Christmas. Or whatever holiday you celebrate.
My name is Liz Raleigh, and I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Carleton College, and I study things about race, adoption, kinship, and the marketplace.
The idea of attaching market
to children is something that's very difficult. But yet, just as there's a housing market, there's a labor market, I argue that there can be sort of a marketplace for children where supply and demand matter.
I hope that through my book, what I'm trying to do is I want to get to a point where we don't need charity. No, thank you. Let's create conditions of equity so that people can keep their children. So we don't need, and we've never needed intervention, but so folks don't think that there is this need for a white, intervention.
I remember the first time that I saw my birth certificate. I was about 10 years old and about to go away on my very first overnight camp ever. And I asked myself, am I allowed to see this? Look at it, I said. So I tread carefully over to the counter and I allowed myself to read the names, my adoptive parents' names, and mine. There were no other names but theirs and mine. There was no name of that mysterious, unfamiliar woman who had given birth to me on that day 10 years ago. Her name was erased, removed, sealed.
The amendment to the special adoption law was passed in 2011. It was enforced in August 2012. And the main body of the amendments were drafted by what we call in Korean the 당사자. So these are the people who are directly affected by the law. And there was a lot of confusion, and I think there still is, within the adoption agencies between what is the law, what is the policy, and what is their practice. Most of the people who are working in the adoption agencies in the United States have actually no idea what's happening in Korea and what a failure it is right now. So if you want to help adult adoptees do birth family searches, if you want to be of service to adoptees, I think you should go there and find out.
Having been in therapy as a youngster and as a young adult, working out adoption and transracial issues, where there was missing pieces, I would sometimes create new pieces. So even looking at the developmental assets approach, it spoke nothing of race, ethnicity, or culture in any of those 40 developmental assets. And so the transracial families that I was working with, I realized that I had to develop my own 40 developmental assets.
When you think of children that are brought up in an institutionalized setting, all of their regulation is created for them in the sense that a caretaker comes in and tells them when it's time to eat or when it's time to sleep. There might be 10 babies in a room and one caretaker, so you cry, and in our settings we have the ability to pick up our child and help them calm down. That's how they learn that regulation. When you're in a room with 10 other children, you can't learn that regulation because you don't have that caretaker immediately available. So that starts really young. I don't care if you were adopted at 3 months old or 6 months old or 6. Those regulation difficulties start young.
I appreciate all of your patience and listening and excellent questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andy Mera, and we are at the Arcus Foundation. The Arcus Foundation is a private foundation that supports nonprofit organizations around the world that are invested in the harmony of people and the harmony of living in the natural world. I currently live in Jackson Heights, Queens, the best neighborhood in New York City. It's one of the most diverse and densely populated neighborhoods. You literally walk down the street and you could have Colombian food, Chinese food. You walk down another block, you could have food from Afghanistan or Nepal. And for a foodie like myself, it is pure heaven. Ever since I could remember, I knew I was a girl. It was simple as that, despite everyone telling me that I was a boy. And there was no aha moment. There was no realization. I first came out to my family as gay because that was the first word I had ever come across to describe myself. And it was later on in my high school years when I became involved with an organization called GLSEN. I became aware of something called transgender or gender identity, and it opened my eyes. At the end of high school, I ended up coming out as trans, and I think it was the first moment in my life where I realized that I knew who I was. I grew up in upstate New York, close to Albany, in a little town called Bethlehem. It was like any other suburb you'd find in America. My adopted family was very supportive of making sure that I knew who I was as a Korean person. My heritage, for as long as I can remember, always played a role in shaping my identity and who I am today. And that ranged from attending Korean culture camp as a child at Camp Mujige, Camp Rainbow. How ironic in the movement that I work in, rainbows. But my favorite memory was actually when we came down to the city every year to march in the Korean American Day Parade. I really do appreciate the hard work that they put into me being aware at a very young age of my identity. Ever since I can remember as a young child, I have always been a storyteller, and I think growing up at one point I thought I was going to be a youth pastor or a missionary because I loved telling other people's stories, and particularly stories that were compelling and had a really impactful message behind them. I found my family in 2010. It was one of those eat, pray, love moments that you have, right? And then I had to take time. A couple years later, I would Facebook, I would post updates about my reunion and my relationship with my family, and a colleague of mine and a friend, he was like, you really should turn your Facebook posts into a blog. How do I talk about a variety of issues together? So I sat on it, and I ended up writing this massive piece during Hurricane Sandy in my home when the world was, I thought, coming to an end, and crying at the same time too. So I'm at my laptop crying, and the wind is blowing and garbage cans are just being thrown in the air and smacking against houses, and putting my heart and soul into this piece. In 2010, I went back to Korea for the very first time. I arrived at the agency with a group of Koreans and my translator, and was met with a reluctance to show me my records because of my posse. Inevitably though, they allowed me to see my records. They censored some information, including my parents' birth dates and social security numbers, but they were able to show me the narrative. And the story that I was told was absolutely different from what both my family and I had developed an understanding around. And how can you withhold this information when we build an identity, a complete identity around it? I was floored. On my last day in Korea, I searched for my family. I went to a local police station that was right outside of the Seongnam subway stop. I had known from my file that that was where I was brought. I was able to persuade the officer to search for my family. The officer told me that day that my father had passed away, and my mother was still alive, and there were 2 women with her name that were born on the birth date that I had, and one of them was an hour away from the police, and I just knew that was my mom. I remember feeling sick when we got the phone call that they had arrived and were parking their car in the lot, but I ended up walking out to the entrance of the police station and seeing these 2 women in the distance, and one of them stopped in her tracks. And my mom, I remember, she let out this guttural wail and took me into her arms and said, "My baby has come home." And it felt liberating and freeing. During my time spent with my family in Korea, there was a day where I had an argument with my mom. My mom actually sat me down and said, look, I know we just had this argument, but I feel like there's something else there. And when my mom talks to me in Korean, she still says, mommy. So she said, tell mommy what's wrong. And she was persistent. My mother is a very persistent woman, and now I understand where I get it from. And she kept on asking, what is wrong? I think there's something hidden that you're not telling me. And she said to me, can I give you a clue of what I think it is about? And so I said, sure. She said, I think it has to do with how pretty you are. This is impossible. How does she know? I wasn't going to ruin this moment by denying who I am. I truly am. And so I turned to my mom and I said, Mom, I'm not a boy. I am transgender. She grabbed my hand, gently lifted up my head, and said, it's okay. Mommy knew. I thought I had given birth to a son, but I have a daughter instead. And that's okay. You're beautiful and precious, and I love you. I didn't know what to expect when I wrote the piece. I wasn't sure if people would understand the story, if they could relate to it, because being a Korean adoptee is one thing, but it's a totally different ballgame to say, I am Korean, I'm Korean American, I'm a Korean American adoptee, and I also happen to be trans. I do not believe that I would show up on a census. I remember at 9 o'clock, the piece went up on the Huffington Post, and I was bombarded on Facebook with Facebook status updates and tweets and Tumblr. But the most powerful thing about the story was that people actually related to it. I think one of the messages that's important that I try to share with people is that it's not just about me. It's about a community of adoptees that are out there and that have similar and even different stories than myself that are just as interesting and as impactful and important to share. It's important to point them in the direction of others that are willing to step forward and to share their experiences. I have been meaning to go back. There's a lot of fears, those associated with the second trip back and having the right moment to go back and work and everything else that comes up into your life. I'm now engaged to a really wonderful dude, and he's also Korean and adopted. And I also have to meet more of my extended family, and that unto itself is going to be like my big fat Korean reunion. And I have the familial responsibility to bring him back to Korea to formally introduce him to my family. And I'm really excited about that trip that will hopefully take this year. I now have to plan a wedding, and I'm just like, what the hell? Oh my God, can I just tell you, that is an experience unto itself. Signing up and then like being bombarded with, what pastels do you want at your wedding? Or like 5 cups to look at for your reception, or, and you're probably going to use that.
A little bit.
My name is Victor Gonzalez, and we are in Astoria, New York, which is about 15 minutes from Midtown Manhattan. I've been here since 1995. So I believe the math on that puts it at 24 years. When I was a kid, I always wanted to live in New York City. My folks would take me into the Philharmonic once a year, and I remember vividly being on the Long Island Railroad, and I would always ask if we could go to like the last car so I could put my face to the window and my hands, I would cup my hands like that. And I remember when the skyline would come into view, and I just thought, that was the coolest thing. And I remember thinking, I would love to live there someday. My first living memory was when I was 3 years old and I was in the back of a car and they were saying, okay, Victor, you're going to your new home. And I remember kicking a basket of clothes and I remember being really terrified. And then I got out of the car and my soon-to-be brother and sisters came running out of the house and he's here. And so it was, although I look back on it now as a very fond memory, ironically at that point it was really traumatic. I was terrified, I didn't know what was going on or anything. The way my mother talked about it was that this was something very special that had been done. This was something that, you know, they had sought me out and brought me into their family, and that I was as much a part of their family as every other member of the family. And I absolutely felt that way. I never felt like I was treated differently. What it did do, though, is it instilled in me this sort of sense of wanting to know who they were, which was radically different from my younger brother, who was also adopted, but he was adopted from Vietnam. He's 5 years younger than me, and he had no desire to know who his biological family was, which baffled me. I used to wonder, like, wow, how could you not want to know where you're from? But he would look at me and be like, why would you want to know? Like, here's your, you know, this is our family, you know. But, and I respect that, and I obviously respected him for that. So around the time I started thinking about colleges, I had applied to 6 different schools, and the last one I went to was Fordham University in the Bronx. And I'd love to tell you that it was because of their rigorous Jesuit-style education, but I just saw this gigantic lawn with all these Gothic buildings, and I thought, this is so cool. I did graduate from there, and then I stayed in the Bronx for maybe a few years after. So I lived in the Bronx for about a good 7 years. Unbeknownst to me, the university was located, or is located, 5 minutes from where my biological mother had been living the entire time. Back in around 1999, I had put my name in what's the Mutual Consent Registry. And I did so without any expectations. Maybe, you know, almost 8 or 9 years passed, and all of a sudden I received a letter in the mail. And I opened the letter and it said Department of Health Mutual Consent, you know, Registry. And I gotta tell you, my heart just stopped. I started reading and it said, you know, dear Mr. Gonzalez, you have a biological sibling that is attempting to make contact with you. Oh God. In my mind, I had really given up on the idea of finding my biological family. I had spent 35 years looking for them unsuccessfully. When I saw this, I wasn't prepared for it in any way, shape, or form. And so the very next thought I had was one of terror, because I thought, why doesn't it say my biological mother is looking for me? Victor, you have to calm down. Like, you don't actually know what that means. So I kind of like, you know, stepped back for a minute, and it said, okay, well, you know, the letter said, well, you know, if you notarize this information, you know, send your contact information, get it notarized, send it back to us, we will forward that information over to this person, and then the two of you will be in contact with one another. So that's exactly what I did. But I took it a step further. I got into work the next day, and I got online, and I searched for the hospital that I was born in, which was Flower Fifth Avenue. They had a message board, and I'm looking at the message board. I came across a posting that said, looking for my brother, born 1970. I just found out about this, hoping and praying for an answer. I know this is like a long shot. I'm on the internet, but maybe? I wrote back, a few days passed, nothing happens. I said, oh, forget it, you know. Then I said, you know what, let me do something. And I took the email address, and I remember putting it in Google, and an alternate email address came up. And so I wrote an email to that. The next day I got into work, I get this message that said, could this be? You know, I don't want to get your hopes up, and I don't want you to get my hopes up. If there's any other identifying information that you would be comfortable sharing with me, that would perhaps let either of us know that this is in fact who we think we are, you know, that would be great. And so I did, and the next day I get into work, and I get an email that said, dear Victor, your search is over. You are my brother. oh my God, I just found my family. Imagine you get this email and there's this flood of information with photos and facts that you just never knew. And he said, I'm married, I have 4 children, I live in Florida. I'm going on a break in 15 minutes and I'll call you then. He called 15 minutes later, like he said he would. At some point he makes a reference to a brother. And he said, you know, our older brother. And I said, our older brother? I said, wait, I'm confused. I thought you were my older brother. And at that point he said, oh, he's like, you don't know, do you? And I said, no, what? And he said, we had an older brother. And when he was 8 years old, he was a kid who was picked on a lot. And so one of the kids, I guess at school, had pushed him into a wall or a post or a pillar of some kind. And as a result, he went into a coma. I think he woke up briefly for maybe 5 minutes, and but went into a coma and 2 weeks later passed away. My first reaction was, I felt sad, but not in the sadness of something, because I hadn't known this person ever, but it was sadness for my brother, and trying to imagine, because even in those few moments, I was already starting to feel this bond towards him, and I felt sad that he had to go through that, and it essentially meant that he was raised in a family by himself. Now, at one point he said, look, I'm flying up there. I'm gonna be up there this weekend. I get to the airport and I'm looking around and I see this guy in an 8-ball jacket and he's looking around and I see him and I'm like, yeah, that's him. You know, that the guy looks like me. We got back to the apartment and you know, we sat down, we had a few tequila shots from what I remember, and the next morning I remember just hearing this loud thud next to my nightstand, and it was a measuring cup. It was my Pyrex measuring cup, which had been filled to the brim with water. And he was like, all right, get ready, we're going to meet your mom. I said, okay. We got to the train, took the N to 59th, switched to the 4, took the 4 up to 170th. Now, as the train is getting closer, I'm realizing this is really going to happen. What has felt surreal is not going to be surreal anymore. We get out of the train, and he gets on the phone. They're talking for a minute, and he's like, come on, just get here already, you know? Next thing you know, he says, all right. He's like, there's your mom. And then I look diagonally across the street, and I see this tiny woman. We make eye contact, and I had this sudden urge to just sprint across the street. So, you know, the light changes red, and I ran across the street, and we hugged each other, and I gotta tell you, we were obviously both in tears. I'm sure people were like, what is going on with these two people? I'm really happy that I met my biological mother, and I absolutely love her. But at the same time, I am very clear that, and I always want it to be understood by everyone that I come across, that the mother that raised me is my mother. There's just no replacing her. There is no other, I'm not interested in referring to her as anybody else other than my mother. My own mom will say, you know, there are times when she said, how's Hilda? Or she'll say, how's your mother? Have you talked to her? My own mother will say, how is your mother? So you cannot replace, you know, somebody raising you and taking care of you and, you know, molding you into or helping mold you into the kind of person you are. So, you know, even as the years have passed since I've had contact with my biological family, I've always been cognizant of being respectful about it, because, you know, family is like one of those like universal things that people really, like when all else fails, there's family. And so I never wanted to do anything that would make my family think that I had like sort of divided loyalties. But it really, what I came to realize in the years after connecting with my biological family was that it posed a challenge that I didn't think would exist, which was my sense of family grew. When people would say, you know, how many brothers and sisters do you have? For 35 years, I've said, you know, I have 2 sisters and 2 brothers. Just, you know, no hesitation. And what I ultimately, you know, what I now find myself saying is like, I have 2 sisters and 3 brothers. I had to negotiate a new set of relationships, and that was something that was unanticipated and at times has been and even continues to be challenging at times.
My name is Karen Bromley, and we are at Chelsea at the Bromley Group offices. I've had the luck and the fortune to travel quite a bit. I can't tell you how excited I am when the plane comes into New York City and we're landing. There is just a magnetism and an electricity around New York City that cannot be duplicated, and I've never found it anywhere else. I love New York. I was first brought into the Salvation Army orphanage system when I was about 2.5. I was actually sent out into homes. So I was in 3 different foster homes until I was 10. All the foster homes I lived in were in Brooklyn. And then I was fortunate enough and blessed enough to be able to be brought to a home that ended up adopting me. My caseworker, Mrs. Arnold, was really like my guardian angel. The day that she came to me in my 3rd house in Brooklyn, and the other 2 were no picnic, she brought me outside and she said, if you could pick the parents you wanted, what would you pick? And I said, young, rich, and good looking. I figured if I get to ask for whatever I want. She turned around and said to me, well, I think I have the parents for you. When I came to their house, it was a ranch-style house. It was a lovely house. But when you're coming from tenements in Brooklyn, I felt like I was Annie walking up the front steps. And I was standing there in my very best Salvation Army clothes that didn't fit, that were all messed up and not so good. And it just was an incredible moment in my life. I do remember all of that very, very well. I was adopted into the most wonderful family. At the time that I came into their home, they had already adopted a boy. That was my brother Kurt, and he was 2.5 years younger than me. And my sister Kim, who was adopted at the age of 1 week. And then my parents adopted a 4th child, a boy, Chris. When I came to my parents' house, my name was Joan. And my mother, she said, I wanted to tell you, would love to talk to you about a name. She said, our children's names begin with K, and we would love to have you have the name Karen. And we would like to consider you one of our children. And I said, well, I really like the name Katrina. But I was reading the book Heidi, so there was a character in there, and I obviously, for some reason, related to that. And my mother, being as astute and smart and special as she was, said, on Monday we'll go to the library, and there's a book of names, and we'll look at all the names that begin with K, and you can tell us what name you would like to have. All of a sudden I heard my brother calling, and I heard my brother yelling, Karen, Karen, come here, Karen. I want to show you our room, or my room. And In that split second, my head said to myself, you are no longer Joan, you're Karen. I felt that it was a new beginning. I said to my mother many years later, I said, do you really understand how brilliant that was? Because you really gave me a whole new platform. My parents, at the time when my caseworker from the Salvation Army brought me to the Hagen House, they lived in Valley Stream, Long Island. And within the first year of being there, we moved upstate New York to a little town called Frankfort, New York, outside of Utica. When my parents drove into the driveway of our house the first day, I said, I will not live here for a long time. I am moving back to the city, in my head. I really only lived in the Hagen House, which this is also something that I find astounding. But I actually only lived in their house for 7 years. Because when I was 17, I left to come to FIT. When I started my agency, I ended up getting a client called Gitano. And Ezra Daba owned and ran the children's division. It was called E.J. Gitano. He's still my client today, actually. And one day, it was during Michael Jackson had created the video We Are the World. And he had gotten the whole music industry together to do that. And one of the women from another company that was on the same floor as Gitano, her name was Barbara Toback, came to Ezra and said, I think we should do something for children. And Ezra asked a very key question. He said, if we could give money or product to help needy children, what should we give? And unanimously, it was brand new product. So we started the organization called Kids in Distressed Situations, KIDS, and that was back in 1988. And my passion was, this was an opportunity for me to be able to provide to children brand new product, which was something that I had never had up until the time I had gone to my parents. By the time hand-me-downs are given to children, as I well know, it's not so nice. We have, over our 28 years, donated over $1 billion of brand new product. We not only give to children, we also give to families. And we provide home, and we provide furniture if they need it. New underwear is an amazing thing. I mean, can you imagine not having new underwear? So in that case, companies like Jockey, who are on our board, they're so generous and so amazing. We have been endorsed by President Obama, President Clinton, Mayor Bloomberg. The joy is incredible, really. They're so happy, they're so excited. It's such a great way to share and to give back. When I came to my parents, it was Easter week. And that week, my mother took me to Lord & Taylor and to pick out clothes. And it was just amazing. I mean, because I had never done that. I'd never shopped, I'd never bought new clothes. That probably was one of our first real arguments was, no, I like these shoes, but you should have these shoes. So it was a lot of give and take. Obviously, I had a sense of my own style at that point already. But nevertheless, that experience and being able to wear new clothes was such a traumatic experience for me, and dramatic, that I was empowered to do this.